Okay, we ready? Let's get rolling. Okay, so thank everyone for coming. Thank to the Kollel for the opportunity to prepare this shiur. I'd like to dedicate this shiur to Nishmas, my maternal grandfather, my mother's father, Shlomo Doiv, and Mordechai Shapiro, who was a descendant of great Hasidic yichus, and I'm sure he would have appreciated this year. And it should be his fourth yahrzeit was just last week. It should be Ilan Nishmasai.
Which Hasidic?
He came from Ukraine. He was a Ben Achaben from Pinchas Mikaretz, and amongst others. Okay, so I'd like to discuss today a minhag, a custom in Klal Yisrael, which we'll see is carried out by all sects of Klal Yisrael, Litvish, Hasidish, and Svardim. Although, as we go through the sources, we'll see that there were many who frowned upon this minhag for various reasons. It's seemingly against a halacha mufureshet. It's seemingly against the open Gemara and a Shulchan Aruch. Nonetheless, as we say, minhag Yisrael Torah, as it's a minhag in Klal Yisrael, so the poskim work very hard. They grapple very hard to find appropriate halachic basis for carrying out this custom. So the earliest person that I was able to track down that seemed to have carried out practice Lamaisa was the Maharal. This minhag is not mentioned in the Gemara. It's not mentioned in the Rishonim. It's first mentioned now. When I mean to say that the Maharal is the first source, it's the Maharal mipi Shmuel, meaning it's a tradition brought down in the name of the Maharal. The Maharal in the Svarim, as far as I was able to research, does not bring it down, but it's brought down as a story that's said over that what the Maharal practiced himself. The Maharal lived approximately in the 1500s, so we're talking about 500 plus years ago is the earliest source that I was able to track down for this minhag. And this where it's quoted is in a fascinating kuntris that's called Kuntris Bikur Chicago. Kuntris of a visit to Chicago. This is a mimer that the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rav Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson Zatzal, gave in Tufshin Bays in 1942 when he visited Chicago. This was shortly after he arrived in America. I'm not getting involved in all the history of this minute, but basically he came to America and he worked very hard on establishing what he felt needed to be a strong educational system for elementary school, for day schools, and Chabad built up their whole system of schools, and he was in Chicago giving a mimer on Parshas B'Shalach in 1942, 70 plus years ago.
St. Louis during that.
Came to St. Louis also at that time, but I didn't see a kuntras printed from his trip to St. Louis. And the point of his talk at that point was to strengthen Jewish education and to get the day school movement going. And he started off his shmooze by telling over the following story. So it's here in Yiddish, and I got Dr. Pesach Zerom, hopefully he'll make it shortly, who is a Yiddish linguist to help translate it for me so it's accessible for everybody. The basic idea is that the Maharal, who was the Rav in Prague, as we're familiar, on Shabbos, Parshas B'Shalach, would call all the school children and the Rebbeim and the parents of the young children into the shul courtyard on Shabbos afternoon. Parshas B'Shalach is before Pirchei groups were invented, and the Maharal himself, so to speak, led the group, and he would speak to all the kids, and he would tell them about the great story of that week's Parsha of Kriyas Yamsuf and all the various Nisim and the Midrashim, everything that happened, and then he would tell them specifically about how when the Yamsuf split, there were trees and there were fruits growing from the trees, and the children plucked fruits from the trees and fed it to the singing birds. The birds also were singing at the time, it seems to be brought down, and the children fed it this magical fruit that appeared by the nace of Kriyas Yamsuf to the birds that were singing. And at the end of his whole mimer, at the end of the whole discussion, Maharal will give out some type of kasha, some type of wheat to the children, and the children would, in Prague, would throw out the wheat to the birds, and everyone went home, and the Maharal gave them a bracha, and everyone lived happily ever after. So this is the earliest source I was able to track down, that there was a custom in Prague that the Maharal did with the children, specifically it seems like, on Parshas B'Shalach year to year. Okay, like we said though, this minhag is not mentioned in the Gemara, and if we go through the Gemara, which is number 2 in the booklet, we'll see the Gemara at the end of Masechta Shabbos, in the 24th parak of Shabbos, discusses in great detail. We're going to try to just bring out what we need from this Gemara, but there's a lot of detail in the permissibility, or when it's permissible to feed animals on Shabbos and when it's forbidden. As a general rule of thumb, it's forbidden for a person to feed animals on Shabbos midrabanan. The Rabbanan decreed you can't feed animals on Shabbos because it's a tircha, it's excessive work that's not necessary for Shabbos. However, if the animals are pets or something that you own and therefore you're responsible for them, then Allah is you're responsible to feed them because they're dependent on you for food. And the Mishnah says that, goes through various examples. I don't want to get bogged down in all the details of all the cases. Some of the words here are a little difficult to understand the exact differences of what type of different feedings we're discussing. But the idea, we're just going to take out some general ideas from the Gemara, is that you cannot give water to bees or to birds, but you can give water to geese and chickens and birds that are living in cages in more domesticated settings. And the Gemara goes back and forth on this, again, different discussions, and the Gemara towards the end comes out that there's an opinion of Rabbi Yehuda who says there's a difference between sticking it to the animals directly or just putting it in front of the animals. And he makes a distinction between certain animals where it's permissible and certain animals where it's not. Again, I'm being a little bit vague because there's a lot of details in the Gemara, but the basic idea is those animals which are dependent upon you for food, you could, yes, feed. And those which are not dependent upon you for food, you cannot feed on Shabbos. Again, the Isser is D'Rabbanan. There's no Isser D'Oraisa involved. Rav Ashi suggested that you should find a source for this opinion of Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah, because we see in the Mishnah that you cannot give water to bees and a particular type of birds, but you see you can give water to geese. So Rav Ashi suggests that should imply, like the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, that those things which are dependent on you, you could give food to, and those which are not dependent on you, you cannot give food to. That's why you cannot give water to the bees. The bees don't need you to give them drink. They're self-sufficient. The Gemara says, no, there's no proof from the Mishnah to this opinion, because why would the Mishnah specifically say water? Why does the Mishnah talk about food? Rather, the Mishnah specifically says water, because water is very easily found for bees, says the Gemara, or the other type of birds. Therefore, they can track down water for themselves. But certain food, which it seems like from the Gemara, which even bees would not be able to get, it seems like from the Gemara, the Mishnah would imply that you could, yes, feed those animals even though they're not dependent on you for food. So it comes out, Maskanas HaGemara, let's just recap. We have the Mishnah, which seems to make a difference in different types of birds and bees, of when you could and can't feed them. The Gemara introduced us to an opinion of Rabbi Yehuda and a Brisa that says that the difference is whether or not the animals are dependent upon you for food or not. That's Rabbi Yehuda of the Brisa. That's his distinction. The Gemara attempts to bring a raya to Rav Yehuda from our Mishnah, which you see that bees you cannot give water to. The Gemara rejects the proof from the Mishnah because the Gemara says perhaps the Mishnah specifically said water because water is always readily available, as opposed to other foods you'll be able to give to the bees even though the bees are not dependent upon you for food. So, Maskanas HaGemara is we have a standing opinion of Rabbi Yehuda from a Brisa, and we do not have a sufficient proof to Rabbi Yehuda from the Mishnah. But we have Rabbi Yehuda in a Brisa who still holds of his opinion that there is a fundamental distinction between animals that are dependent on you and animals that are not dependent on you. Just we have no proof to that opinion from the Mishnah. So the Ran, which is number 3 on the sheet, seem to take from the Maskanas HaGemara, from the fact that we have no proof to Rabbi Yehuda from the Mishnah, and our Mishnah seems to imply that you cannot give water specifically to birds, but the Gemara said to the bees, but to other food that is not readily available, you could give to them. So the Ran wants the paskin that therefore he holds the maskana. We should go like the Mishnah, and therefore specifically water is forbidden to give to the bees, but any food which they cannot easily get, you'd be allowed to give them on Shabbos. And the Ran says it's bewilderment. It's a pella to me that the Rambam and the Rif paskin like the Brisa. They paskin like Rav Yehuda, that there's a distinction between those which are dependent upon you for food and those which are not dependent upon you for food. And therefore the Ran says, I don't understand, because the Gemara says there's no proof to that from the Mishnah. And he at the end of the day, the Ran comes out, he's having a machlokas between himself and the Rambam. Again, the Ran's opinion is like the way the Gemara understands our Mishnah, and that the Mishnah is saying that specifically you cannot give water to the bees and those specific type of birds because water is always readily available. They can just go to a local puddle and get something to drink. But other food, the Mishnah seems to apply, you could give them even though you're not responsible to feed them. And the Rambam and other Rishonim paskin like the Brisa, Rabbi Yehuda, that says there's a fundamental distinction between those which are dependent upon you, the animals which are dependent upon you for food, we'll just call them loosely pets, or any other animals you might have in your barn that they need you to feed them, that will be allowed, as opposed to any other animals like bees or certain types of birds which are able to forage for food by themselves, you will not be allowed to feed them on Shabbos. So it comes out we have a machlokes rishonim. Okay, for those who have time, there's a Shiltei Kibarim in number 4, which he tries to defend the Rambam's opinion against the Ran's question, and answers why the Shulchan Aruch, which is number 5, paskins like the Rambam. So halacha l'maisa comes along the Shulchan Aruch in number 5 and Hilchos Shabbos and Shin Chaf Dalid, and the Shulchan Aruch paskins like the Rambam's opinion that there's a distinction between pets and other animals. Pets which are dependent upon you for food, you could yes feed, and animals which are not dependent upon you for food, like birds or others, you cannot feed them on Shabbos. Again, keep in mind always that the whole issue here is only midrabanan because of tircha, of excessive work on Shabbos. The Shulchan Aruch does end off with another halacha, which is really from that Gemara further. We didn't speak out that a dog you can always feed on Shabbos, and the Magen Avraham speaks out in number 6. Even if that dog is not yours, which we'll get to more a little bit later, there's always a permissibility to feed a dog.
Whether it's domesticated or
whether it's your dog or whether it's someone else's dog or whether it's a stray dog.
So why does the Shulchan Aruch make a distinction between the chazir and the kelev?
Okay, because the Gemara makes that distinction. A chazir, because it's always forbidden for a yid to raise pigs. And so the Gemara says, of course, there's a person who raise pigs, so we don't want to encourage that at all, so we always forbid it. As opposed to dogs, there's no prohibition of raising a dog, and therefore, and we'll discuss later why is a specific reason to feed a dog, but even if the dog is a stray dog, it's permissible to feed it on Shabbos. Now, mitzvah, right. We'll see why in a minute, why maybe perhaps mitzvah a little later. That's not the focus right now. I just want to speak at that halacha. The Magen Avraham then, number 6, where it's arrowed off, then all of a sudden, as like a Maimar HaMusker, as like a side point, tells you, oh, by the way, there are those people, says the Magen Avraham, who feed the birds on Shabbos Shirah, but he says, "Ve'eino nachon," it's not appropriate. Why? Asharei ein mizonos and alecha. Since we're passing like the Rambam and those Rishonim, that the distinction of animals is whether you're responsible to feed it or whether it can find food for itself. And since your regular pigeon or any other bird you have, your cardinal that's flying around here, since they can always find food by themselves, you would not be allowed to, says the Magen Avraham, feed them on Shabbos.
No.
Shira.
What if you put your bird feeder out before Shabbos?
Okay, hold on. We'll get to all those. That's a good question. Granted. I want to point out that we said before the Maharal was the first source, Mipi HaShmua, based on tradition that he actually fed the birds. Maharal predated the Magen Avraham by about 75, 100 years or so, something like that. The Magen Avraham is the earliest source I found in writing. Magen Avraham lived in the 1600s, of who just brings down the custom. He doesn't tell you who did it. He just says, I've heard there's such a custom, and I feel it's not appropriate. I saw furthermore in the Siddur of the Yavitch of Yaakov Emden, who lived 150 years plus after the Magen Avraham, he says, he passed like the Magen Avraham, and he adds off with the following words. He says, it's a shtusu, it's a foolish thing to feed the birds in Shabbos Shirah, and it's aser. So, the Yavitch, the Yaakov Emden in his Siddur. So, although now we see the simple reading of the Shulchan Aruch and the simple reading of the Magen Avraham and the Mishnah Berurah, which I don't have copied of the Mishnah Berurah, in Siman Shin Chav Dal quotes this Magen Avraham la'alacha, and seems to go the opinion that it will be forbidden to feed the birds on Shabbos because you're not responsible, they're not your pets, and therefore it will be asur midrabanan to feed the birds on Shabbos. However, as that we like to continue the discussion now, I would like to go through various other paiskim from Litvish, Hasidish, and Sephardic who all hold that it will be permissible and mandatory to Shabbos. So, the Aruch HaShulchan, which is number 7 here, quotes in the middle of the paragraph. He first quotes the Magen Avraham, and then he quotes from a sefer Tosefes Shabbos. Tosefes Shabbos is one of the Gedolei Achronim on Hilchos Shabbos. It's written on Seder Shulchan Aruch. And in Tosefes Shabbos there, and the Aruch Shulchan is quoting him, wants to defend this custom, wants to defend the minhag of feeding the birds on Shabbos Shirah. He says, similar to what we said before in the name of the Maharal, he says that since, as we know, by Shabbos Shirah, even the birds sang the Shirah of the Yam, and they got a reward, so to speak, then they were fed the fruits from the trees that miraculously grew for the Yidden by the Yam Suf. Therefore, he says, it's to remember the Simchas Shiras Hayam, the happiness of that singing, and therefore he says that since our intention when we feed the birds is to remember this simcha, this great happiness, and we're doing it, so to speak, l'shem mitzvah, although it's not really a mitzvah per se to feed them, but we're doing it for the sake of remembering this nace that happened to us. He calls that l'shem mitzvah. Therefore, he says it should be permissible. We should waive any rabbinic restriction in such a case. Now, the Aruch Shulchan doesn't quote the araya. Where do you find a precedent for such a concept? But the Tosefes Shabbos, which I didn't copy here, but he himself quotes a raya. He brings from the Sefer El Yerabah, which is also one of the Paiskim on the Shulchan Aruch. The El Yerabah later on in Hilchos Shabbos in Siman Shin Lamed Hey quotes many rabbinic restrictions that we lift on Simchas Torah in honor to commemorate the happiness of the day. For example, we're all familiar with the fact that we all dance on Simchas Torah. Many of us get very carried away on a regular Shabbos. We don't encourage such lebedika dancing usually. on Simchas Torah, we lift that rabbinic restriction. Furthermore, the Eli Rabbah brings down that there seemed to have been a minhag in his days where they threw out all types of fruits and nuts, and the children would go around with baskets and start collecting the fruits and the nuts from the floor, and I don't know exactly what they did with them. They ate them, the candy apples. I'm not clear exactly what they did with it, but it was some type of minhag of throwing out fruits and nuts, and the kids would run around with baskets and collect it.
This is on Shabbos Shirah.
On Simchas Torah.
On Simchas Torah.
Now, without getting involved in all the particulars of Hilchos Shabbos, however, there is a rabbinic prohibition of taking baskets and gathering fruits from an outside area on Shabbos because it looks like ma'amer, even though here you're not gathering. It's not from a cut field. It's not fresh produce that you cut per se, but it's a rabbinic restriction of taking a basket and going around and gathering up fruit because it looks like ma'amer, which is gathering with lam tes malachas and other issues, and it's prohibited because of under the category of uvdu dechol on Shabbos. It's mundane work on Shabbos, so we don't do it. Nonetheless, the Eli Rabbah writes on Simchas Torah, we're going to lift that prohibition because we're doing it in the spirit of the day. Everyone's misamech, everyone's happy. So although there is a rabbinic restriction of going around and gathering fruits on Shabbos, will allow us to carry on this tradition on Simchas Torah because it's simcha. Says Tosefes Shabbos, I want to say, in the same vein, on Shabbos Shirah, since we're feeding the birds, we're doing it as an expression of simcha. We're so happy that we had the miracle of crossing the sea, and even the birds joined us in that miracle by singing and partaking of our fruits that we got as a nace. Therefore, he says, in a similar line of thinking, that machmas simcha, because there's great happiness on this day, therefore I would allow you, says the Tosefes Shabbos, to feed the birds on Shabbos Shirah.
The Aruch HaShulchan was actually started out with Lubavitch. I don't know if
That's true. Fine. Okay. Let's not get logged down.
There's a specific mitzvah simcha on Shabbos Shirah.
No.
It says l'shem mitzvah.
Right. There's no extra mitzvah. But Lamaisa, we read the Oz Yashir today, and it is a joyous occasion to say. But you're right. There's no particular specific. Right. It's a simcha, I think, of the day in general that we lane today. Although it's not the date we crossed the Yam Suf, that was the 7th day of Pesach, right? But we lane the story of Kriyas Yam Suf on Shabbos Shirah. So to commemorate that joyous feeling, we want to do this custom at that time. So the Aruch HaShulchan comes out, Lamaisa, he says there's room based on this Sefer Tosefes Shabbos to be makel, to be lenient, because we're doing it l'shem simcha, and we can allow the people who would like to carry out this custom to throw out the food to the birds on Shabbos. Furthermore, number 8, we have the Kaf HaChaim, which is also on Seder Shulchan Aruch, which is from the Sephardi camp, and he also first quotes the Magen Avram, who says it's Aser, and then he also goes along and quotes the Tosefes Shabbos that says there's room to be lenient over here, and we can allow people to do it because since they're doing it, the Shem Mitzvah, he says, because people say that even the birds saying Shira by the Yam Suf, therefore, in lahak b'bakach, we don't have to be mak when those people want to do this minig. So the Kaf HaChaim as well is finding leniency to allow this custom to be done on Shabbos. Okay, so until now, we've basically discussed the reason for allowing this to be done. Is what we brought from the Maharal, that the idea is that the birds sang shiur with us by the Yam Suf, and they also were fed the fruits of the trees. Therefore, the Maharal used to tell the children to throw the fruits out, and other Paiskim just said even seemingly allow even the adults to do it based on Tosefes Shabbos, who did not make a distinction between children and adults. Seemingly from the Gemara, it will be problematic. Although it is a machlokes rishonim, because according to the Ran, the whole issue wouldn't start. It will be permissible because the birds don't have easy access to all types of food that we might give them. So according to the Ran, the whole question doesn't start. But Lamaisa, the Shulchan Aruch is like the Rambam, that the distinction is that since the birds are not dependent upon us for food, we're not allowed to feed them. Nonetheless, many of the Paiskim we saw so far, the Tosefes Shabbos, the Aruch HaShulchan, and the Kaf HaChaim allowed it to be done. In number 9,
what do the modern day poskim hold, like the Avodia Yosef and so on?
Oh, we'll get you. Hold on. We're getting there. We got a couple more pages. Hold on. Don't go away. In number 9, we have from the Sefer Nemuki Orach Chaim, which is the Munkacher Rebbe. Now we're in the Hasidic camp, and he's going to introduce to us another reason why this would be permissible. He brings in another. I don't know if it's a Messiah or really it's based on various midrashim he put together. That another reason he's bringing from the Rebbe Menachem Mendel Miribinov of why he said this is permissible to do this on Shabbos Shirah. As we know, nothing to do with Kriyas Yam Suf. Another part of Parshas B'Shalach is the Parsha of the Mon. And we know Moshe Rabbeinu gives exact instruction to the Yidden that on Friday, everyone's going to take a double portion because on Shabbos morning, the Mon will not fall. And lo and behold, there are two famous troublemakers or people who always seem to have another agenda up their sleeve. Dasan and Aviram come along, and it's brought down that they went ahead early Shabbos morning. They woke up early, and they went ahead and wanted to prove Moshe Rabbeinu wrong, so they started placing man Shabbos morning at the various entrances of the tents of the Yidden. So when the Yidden would wake up Shabbos morning, they would say, "Oh, Moshe Rabbeinu is wrong. There's man here." But the early bird catches the worm, and therefore the Messiah is that the birds came out early that Shabbos morning, and they ate up all that man that Dasim and Aviram put out. And then by the time the Yidden came out of their tents, of course everyone went to daven late. It was Shabbos morning, so no one else was up too early. And therefore, by the time the Yidden came out to davening Shabbos morning, all the man was gone, and Moshe Rabbeinu was proven correct, and Dasim and Aviram failed at their mission. So says the Nemuki Arachai and Munkach Rebbe, bringing from the Rimner Rebbe, that to commemorate this great miracle that the birds did for us, that they saved that which Moshe Rabbeinu said. Now Moshe Rabbeinu would not really have been proven wrong per se because the man didn't really fall. I guess eventually the plot would have came out, but just to I guess avoid this whole deception and this whole front page scandal would have broken loose at the time in the Midbar times. So the birds saved the day, so to speak, and therefore to commemorate this great miracle that the birds did for us. So this is another reason why we want to feed the birds on Shabbos Shirah. Nothing to do with Kriyas Yamsuf, rather to do with a new reason now of the fact that the birds ate the man on this first Shabbos that the man fell, which is commemorated because we read the Parshas Aman in the Shabbos of Parshas Bishalach.
Where did they get the man?
Where did the get the extra month from? That's an excellent question. I was thinking that. I don't know if they had some, if they somehow stretched what they had, or they had some laboratory version.
Didn't they say they got putrefied?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I wasn't sure.
I think it was the old money. It got putrefied.
Yeah, the old, but then it's putrefied. Then how's it going to
get it for give 600,000 people?
I'm not sure. Maybe they never didn't finish the whole mission. It's a lot of work to go through the whole camp early in the morning. So maybe they were working on one area. I'm not sure. It's a good question. I wanted to add to this though. Something we mentioned before. We mentioned before the halacha of the Shulchan Aruch that you're allowed to feed a dog on Shabbos, and the Magen Avram said, Mishmur quotes us also, that's a mitzvah, and we spoke at even if it's not your dog. Now the Meiri in Shabbos and Daf Yud Tes speaks out, it's not copied here, what's the reason, why is it a mitzvah to feed the dog? One of the reasons the Meiri gives is from a pasuk in this past week's Parshas Boy. The pasuk says that when the Klal Yisrael left Mitzrayim, or the night of Makas B'chayres, Yechratz Kelav L'Shoina, the dogs didn't bark at all. So for that miracle, that's against the tendency of the dog. The dog should have been barking. So therefore, the Meiri says that's the reason why it's a mitzvah always, because we always have hakaras hatayr to the dog, so to speak, even though these dogs are, no relation probably to the ones that were in Mitzrayim, or if they are, it's a long lost relative. But nonetheless, it's as many of these parshas bring out ideas of hakaras hatayr, like Moshe Rabbeinu, like the Rav spoke out a couple weeks ago by Shal Shudas. There's many ideas here of hakaras hatayr. So Meiri says, so these hakaras hatayr for the dogs, that they didn't bark, so therefore it's always permissible to feed a dog on Shabbos. Perhaps we can say, based on this reason now, that we have hakaras hatayr for the birds, right? So therefore it should be also a mitzvah, so to speak, to feed the birds, because we're having hakaras hatayr for the birds that they saved from this scheme that was developing by Dasan and Aviram, that they ate the man on Shabbos morning. Okay, so now at this point we have two bona fide reasons that different Mefarshim are bringing, whether it's because we're commemorating the nace of the birds that they sang by the Yam Suf, or we're commemorating the fact that the birds saved the day by eating up the man Shabbos morning from in front of the tents. Now the Eshel Avram Buchach, which is in the back of the Shulchan Aruch, he's is number 10 on the booklets. He's discussing in very interesting halacha, in not in Hilchas Shabbos per se. He's discussing the halacha in general by Netilas Yadayim for a sudo. The halacha is if someone washes, as we know, for bread, you're not allowed to talk. However, there's another halacha that if someone a person who has pets at home is obligated to feed his pets before he eats. Now, let's say someone washed for bread, and before he makes his hamaitzi, he realized he forgot to feed his goldfish, or forgot to feed his dog, or whatever he forgot to feed. Halacha is he's allowed to even be mafsik, he's allowed to talk and say, my dear wife, please go feed the fish. Or he'll tell his wife, I'll be back in a minute, I have to go feed the fish. Whatever halacha is, whatever the case is, because since halacha is you can't eat before you feed your pets, you're allowed to even be mafsik to make sure you fulfill that halacha and go ahead and speak out that I'm going to feed the animals before I make my hamaitzi. And in that discussion, he brings down, in the middle of his discussion about that halacha, he discusses Shabbos Shirah, and discusses the fact that there was a custom to feed birds, And he says, kind of like as a side point, he says, it's a problem because it's a shvus, it's issa d'rabban to feed the animals on Shabbos. He says, perhaps in the middle of the paragraph there, he says, that's why he says, v'nachayin al yedei katan. It's appropriate for a minor to do it. She'ein zeh begeder shvus gomer. It's not a real severe issa d'rabban. Like we said before, it's very machlokes rishayim, how to understand the Gemara. Although Shulchan Aruch is machmir, there's not really any real malacha involved. So he says, if you want to let the kids do it, Eish Avram says you can allow the children to feed the bird on Shabbos. Now, I saw in a kuntres from Rav Kazlitz Shlita, Kazlitz is a Rosh Chabur in Lakewood, so he wanted to suggest that that's why the Maharal specifically only let the children do it. If you remember from the beginning story started off, is the Maharal only wanted the kids to, he told the kids to do it, but simple reading is the reason why he wanted the children to do it is because the children were the ones that fed the birds by Kriyas Yamsuf. So, seems like that's why the Maharal wanted the children to do it. But once you see now the Eish Avram, who's also in halacha, is saying that we shouldn't allow the adults to do it, only the children do it because it's not touched as severe d'Rabbanan, perhaps that's why the Maharal also only wanted the children to do it. However, I think though based on the other reason we brought down from the Munkach Rebbe and the Mendel Ribbenov, that it's to commemorate the other nace that we were remembering that the fact that the birds ate the mun, so there wouldn't be a specific reason to have the children do it unless you're going with the Eish Avram in general, this idea that we don't want the adults to do it. He's not conclusive. The Eish Avram is not coming out conclusively that it will be forbidden for adults to do it. He's just suggesting that it will be more suitable for the children so you'll avoid more halachic problems. Now again, this is not a license that we tell children, I'm not sure something's mutter or not, so you go ahead and do the Avera, right? It's a specific case here where it's not really an Avera, because anyway it's machlokes rishonim and it's only d'Rabbanan and we have reasons to allow it, so he's suggesting that allow a child to do it to avoid any halachic questions. That's the Eish Avram's opinion. However, on the next page, number 11, getting closer to the contemporary poskim like Yehuda's waiting for, we have the Tzitz Eliezer. The Tzitz Eliezer, who was not Hasidish, quite Litvish, big posik in Yerushalayim. He starts off the tshuva discussing this minig, and where it's underlined, he emphasizes this was the minig of Klal Yisrael. He remembers this from his childhood years growing up in Yerushalayim, of many great Talmidei Chachamim, Yireim, Ushleimim, holy and pious people, and no one was meicha against them. This was a custom, he says, in Klal Yisrael that I've seen from my youth. I don't know exactly, we grew up somewhere in Meisharim, somewhere in the little teeny apartments in Vatei something in the middle of Meisharim, where he grew up, and he said this was the custom of Yerushalmi Yidden. They did this custom every Shabbos Shirah. He doesn't mention specifically for the children to do it, and he's actually very bewildered why the Mishnah Berurah doesn't quote the Achronim, the Tosefes Shabbos, who the Mishnah Berurah does quote often, and why the Mishnah Berurah over here leaves him out and doesn't seem to go with him to be Meiko. Why the Mishnah Berurah only quoted the Magen Avram, who is Machmir, and throughout the tshuva he quotes numerous poskim. Some of them we mentioned already. He quotes the Achron, the Kerem Shleima, the Aruch HaShulchan, the Maharsham, and the Das Torah, the Sefer Orchos Chaim, and the Mukar Chaim, and other Achronim who he quotes that were all Meika, and he's very upset that the Mishnah Berurah seemed to leave us on the understanding that this is forbidden without any room to be Meika. And Tzitz Eliezer says that he's seen many great people do it, and he doesn't write explicitly whether or not he did it or not, but it seems to be that he did it. I can't say that 100% because he doesn't write that specifically. It seems though to be from the way he writes the whole tshuva and the way he goes all the achronim who are being makel and brings other reasons. It seems that Tzitz Eliezer himself did practice this custom, and so you can go through on Shabbos Shirah. Yeah, he's talking about on Shabbos. That's where all the poskim. However, in the next page, in number 12, which is from the Sefer Or HaChama, which is also a Yerushalmi Sefer. Or HaChama was written by Rav Zundel Kreuzer, who just passed away a short while ago. A great Yerushalmi tzaddik, not Hasidish. And a similar idea he brings out in the Sefer Shmir Shabbos Kel Chasa, which is also not Hasidish. They bring out the way I just copied it. The Or HaChama. The Or HaChama is very bothered by the exact wording of the Magen Avram and the way the Mishnah Berurah quotes it. He quotes this custom of feeding the birds, and the Magen Avram writes ve'eno nachon, and it's not appropriate. He says, I don't understand. Is it aser or is it mutter? Make up your mind. Eino nachon sounds like it's not appropriate, so don't do it. Is it aser or is it mutter? What's the bottom halacha? Or HaChama says perhaps because it's not really aser, he just didn't feel that it was. Because it's nice that you're getting involved in a machlokes rishonim, and it's seemingly a problem at face value to feed these birds because you don't own them. So he's suggesting against it. However, he concludes at the end. The Or HaChama comes out. The last couple lines he says, "Avol mishen notel me'al hashulchan atzamos uklipim." Someone who's gathering up at the end of his meal the crumbs, the leftover bones, whatever is on his table. He's cleaning up his table at the end of the meal, and instead of putting them in the trash can, puts them out on his porch, puts them out on his windowsill, and puts them out on his front porch. So he says that shouldn't be a problem. What's the difference if I put it in my garbage can or I put it on my front porch? I'm not saying, there's no bird specifically there that I'm saying, I'm feeding this bird. I'm getting rid of my garbage, as long as there's an Erev, obviously, where you can bring out the crumbs and stuff outside. I'm putting out my garbage outside in the front porch. And it happens to be at Shabbos Shirah, happens to be the birds might come and eat it. But since he says, I'm not giving it specifically to a bird, per se, I'm not giving it to a bird, here it is, pigeon, here's your food. And I'm just, the same way I can clean up my table and put it in the trash can, I'm just putting it outside. He says that should be no problem on Shabbos. And the Shmir Shabbos has a similar idea, that a way to avoid the whole shaila, he says just, when you're coming to shake out your tablecloth from the crumbs at the end of the meal, just shake it out by the window, let the crumbs fall outside instead of shaking it into the garbage can, and the crumbs can just fall outside if the birds decide to come on their own, so that's no problem. He says, I saw brought down another option that I never seen anybody practice this lemaisa, but he said there are some people, I guess it depends what climate you're in, have the custom on Shabbos Shirah to eat on their porch. And therefore there are crumbs just falling down on the floor, or other food that's around, and the birds could come and gather up from after you eat, or eat by a windowsill. And I never seen anybody practice lemaisa. I guess especially in most places I'm familiar with, it's cold this time of year, so it's just not so practical to eat outside. But if you're in a warmer climate, maybe if you're down south or somewhere else, and you can eat outside in the patio, that's an easy way to do it. And also you avoid any shaila of feeding the birds specifically. You just leave the crumbs on the floor when you're finished.
Sheva al tasa.
Sheva al tasi, just being passive, leaving the crumbs there when you're finished, and the birds could come, and hopefully the birds will come before the ants come, and you also be makayim that minig. Another suggestion I saw brought down in a Sefer Tshuvas Nishma Shabbos. I don't have a copy of it here, but it's also It's also brought down later, number 14, from the Sefer Lein L'Shabech, in the second last paragraph, and it's the same idea in the Tshuvas Nishma Shabbos, which was written by a Rav in Williamsburg in Brooklyn, Rav Harpenaz. He says a simple solution is that you could put out food before Shabbos with a cover on it. You have some type of plate or something, and you put some type of cake dome or something on it. Obviously it has to be something which has weight, because otherwise if you just put a piece of paper on top, it'll blow off, and all your crumbs will blow off as well. Also, it won't really be such a good cover. Put something out which is some type of cover, something of substance, and then Shabbos morning you can just uncover it. He says that would not even be usher according to the Shulchan Aruch, according to the Magen Avraham, because there I didn't bring any food out on Shabbos. All I did was remove the cover, and that would not fall, he says, and the Lein L'Shabech says as well, that would not fall under the category of any type of tircha on Shabbos. It would not be usher in the Rabbanan, and that's an easy way to fulfill the minig as well without getting involved in any type of shaila or machlekes achronim. So you have just a lot of practical, at this point, a lot of practical ways how to fulfill the minig, whether it's like the Aruch Chama or the Shmir Shabbos Kachasa said, just shaking out the crumbs after your meal outside, so you're not specifically feeding the birds per se, like here it is to the birds, you're just putting it out and the birds can come on their own wings and get it. The other suggestion of eating outside for those people who have a warm climate, or this last suggestion we brought down, that you can put the food out before Shabbos and just uncover it on Shabbos, and you can fulfill the minig like that. Now, this is, you can ask.
What's the basis of, in general, of having to steer your way clear of all these minefields as far as the different shittas are concerned? Why can't one just say, okay, we'll do like the Maharal of Prague did 500 years ago?
Okay.
And
fine, so the Maharal of Prague, fine.
You take everything out of it and you put this little jar of, okay, we'll put a little jar of dog food over here. I mean, not dog food.
Bird food.
Right? Yeah, whatever it is, bird food. And it takes all the festive out of it as far as all the kids are concerned and everything else.
Okay, so
yeah, but we steered clear of all the different shittas, and now we're down to just this little.
So you have a whole week now to plan the Torah prep Shabbos Shirah custom this week, Mitzvah Hashem, and you can get just if a person wants to do that, and it seemed like the Maharal did that, and that was a great way to be mechanech the children and teach them a lot about the Kriyas Yam Suf. It's a great idea, but on the flip side, there are other poskim who would frown upon that practice. So we're trying to satisfy as many camps as we can, and we can find other eitzes how to do it. But you're right, there's bona fide halachic opinions that hold that's 100% permissible, and you go ahead and do it. Especially like we spoke out before for the Eish Avram, that's doing it with the children. There's more room even to be lenient for them to do that. It seemingly it was done on Shabbos, but as we just said, now we'll see in a minute. Hold, I'll answer that question in a minute. The Stipler, Rav Yaakov Yisrael Kanievsky Zatzal, who was originally from Hasidic descent, but sort of, entered more into Lifisha camp later on in his life, or in the earlier part of his life. But he Maisa did wear a gartel, and he did daven nusach svard, and he wanted to keep this minig of feeding the birds on Shabbos Shirah, because obviously he had seen it in his hometown of Horn Steipel and wanted to continue this minig. However, his brother-in-law, the Chazon Ish, very much frowned upon it based on the Magen Avram, like we spoke out. And once the Chazon Ish pointed out to him they shouldn't do it, so there's a machlokes what the stipler did afterwards. I have a machlokes like this between 13 and 14. I discovered this machlokes I found to be a little interesting. Rav Chaim Kanievsky reports, which is number 14, he told his brother-in-law, Yitzchak Zilberstein, that the stipler, after the Chazon Ish told him to stop doing it because it's a machlokes, stiplers do it Motzei Shabbos before he did Mlav Malka. After he did Havdalah, he would go out and feed the birds, and they explain it because until Mlav Malka is over, there's still some aura of Shabbos, some residual part of Shabbos still with you. So the stipler would go ahead and do a Motzei Shabbos before Mlav Malka, so you kind of satisfy the halachic issue of you can't do it on Shabbos itself because potentially it's about some achronim were machmir, but lamaisa, since it's still technically some aura, some radiance of Shabbos still going, so you get the Shabbos aspect of it. You're doing a Motzei Shabbos. The chavrusa of the stipler, which is number 13, he wrote a sefer called Orchos Rabbeinu. He's a talmid and a student of the and a chavrusa of the stipler. He writes that the stipler used to do it Sunday morning. So if you did it Sunday morning, it's very nice, but you kind of lose the more direct connection to Shabbos because although technically you're right, you can make Havdalah Sunday, you can make Havdalah Monday, so there is some loose relation to Shabbos, but I like it better Motzei Shabbos because before it says specifically before Mlav Malka because then you're more in the Shabbos mode.
Depends on how Hasidish the stipler was with the Zmanim.
But even if it being Shabbos early, well, it's still light on Friday afternoon.
So Scott wants to do it, but I was thinking about that. Why can't you just do it Friday afternoon before Shabbos? Candle lighting. It could be because we didn't lay in the parsha yet. I'm not sure. I didn't see anybody discuss that specifically, but it could be we didn't say over the Maisia, we didn't say over the Nisim, whether it's Kriyas Yamsuf, whether it's Parshas Hamon.
To my earlier question, it's probably if we were going to do this sometime after we read the shiur.
Right. So it comes out at this point. What we have now is 3 opinions in the Achronim about when to properly fulfill this custom. You could put it out Friday afternoon. We said it with a cover, and then uncover it Shabbos morning. Or according to many Achronim, you could put it out on Shabbos itself in various different ways, whether you shake out your tablecloth, or you could put, according to some Achronim, you could put it straight out, or according to seemingly what the stipler did, is that he would do a Motzei Shabbos before Mlav Malka. Now this is all based on the 2 reasons we said so far. Either it's to commemorate Kriyas Yamsuf or to commemorate the nace of the mun, that the birds ate the mun early in the morning. I want to now discuss another reason for this custom, which is on the next page, number 15 and number 16. Number 15 is from the Sefer Tameim and Hagim, which is a sefer, as its name connotes, which discusses various minhagim of Klal Yisrael. Has a little bit of a chassidish twist to it. A lot of chassidish minhagim are discussed there, and he brings down in Ois Tzadi Zayin over here a different reason why we feed the birds in Shabbos Shirah. Similar to what we said before, that it commemorates something to do with the mun, but a different aspect of the mun. Not like we said before that the birds ate up the mun from dust and navir, which is true in itself, but that's not the reason why we do it. Rather, the idea that the mun represents to us in general is that Laman Yiru es Alechem, we should see the bread Hashem sent down to us. The way he says it is Laman Yedu v'Yiru Hadoros. The man was a symbol for us for generations. How we have complete confidence and faith in Hashem in all our situations. Hashem is always mamtzi mazayin. Hashem always provides sustenance for Klal Yisrael, just like Hashem provided for us in the Midbar. We know Chazal tell us the Torah is given specifically to that generation of Klal Yisrael that sustain themselves specifically on man. Because when you're living in such a situation, just picture it for a minute. Every night Klal Yisrael went to sleep, the pantry was totally empty. There was no midnight snacks, and there was no, confidence at least to have a box of Cheerios for the morning. There was nothing. Every morning they had to wake up, and they hoped, that there was food outside and they had something to eat, but there was nothing available at night. Whatever they had their supper and they had maybe some snack. I don't know exactly what their menu was, but they went to sleep with an empty pantry. There was nothing there, and that's a tremendous level of bitachon in HaKadosh Baruch Hu that we know every single morning, no matter what happened the day before, Hashem is going to provide for us food again. And he says, and nowadays, ba'avonenu shechara beis hamikdash, and they used to keep in the beis hamikdash it's sluchas hamon, a little jug of man, and they always used to show it to Klal Yisrael when they came up and said, "Remember, Sincenis, right? A jug of the man. This is how we lived in the midbar for so many years." So specifically on Shabbos Shirah, when we lay in the Parshas Hamon, we throw out food to the birds. Why does it represent us? Because Klal Yisrael, throughout the different Mamorei Chazal, I'm not going to involve in that this minute, is compared to birds. And we have to remember that just like the birds always find food, there's always food available, they can always forage around, always find food. HaKadosh Baruch Hu also always provide for us food. Without Amol v'Yagia, there's always ways available for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to sustain us. And we just want to remember that nace of the mun, that it was always available for us, and by showing that we are like the birds, so to speak, that always have food. It's a little more of a machshavadik idea, and we're doing it specifically on Shabbos Shirah because that's the parsha that we lay in the mun. So again, there's nothing to do with Kriyas Yamsuf, nothing to do with the particular nace of remembering that the birds ate the mun in the morning. Rather, it's an idea in general for us to inculcate into us a message that we lay in the parshas of mun and parshas b'shalach, and that's to inculcate into us the idea that HaKadosh Baruch always takes care of us, just like there's always food for the birds. So we're feeding the birds to just remind us that just like the birds always have food, we also, HaKadosh Baruch always provide for us food. Now, although this is born a Chassidish Sefer, in number 16, which is Sefer Livyas Chaim, which is a Sefer from Chacham Ovadia. I'd like to thank Rabbi Greenblatt for having the Sefer. As far as I know, it's the only copy of the Sefer in town. The Sefer Livyas Chaim is a one-volume, fascinating Sefer where Chacham Ovadia writes in Hilchos Shabbos. He writes as follows. I'll tell you short. I think it's fascinating. He writes like this. He's in a dilemma because in Eretz Yisrael, this was maybe about 30, 40 years ago, there were many Sfardi Balei Tshuva who were, on the Baal Tshuva movement, and was very excited about it. But he said it was a problem because many of them couldn't read the Mishnah Berurah because the Mishnah Berurah was in Rashi Ksav, and they weren't trained to read Rashi Ksav, but they knew how to read the block letters. So someone went ahead and reprinted a version of the Mishnah Berurah in block letters. So he said it's great because now many people who were not versed in how to read Rashi Ksav are now able to read the Mishnah Berurah. But he said that brought about a new problem for many of the Sephardic Jews because many of the Sephardic Jews don't follow the psak of the Mishnah Berurah. And now that they're able to read the Mishnah Berurah because it's in block letters, he has to write a sefer explaining all the times where the Sephardic customs differ from that which the Mishnah Berurah. So he wrote this sefer, and he brings down many Sephardi hanhagas which are different than that which the Mishnah Berurah brings down, specifically in Hilchos Shabbos. So here we are, this halacha in Siman Shin Chav Dal in Hilchos Shabbos. Chacham Ovadia writes that although the Mishnah Berurah is machmir, he quotes many of the poskim that we brought down before. There's room to be makel, and he seems to imply that even it's a Sephardi custom as well. I don't know if Chacham Ovadia himself did it. I didn't see it brought down if he himself practiced it, but he seemed to have find great room to be lenient, also to fulfill this custom of feeding the birds on Shabbos Shirah for many of the reasons we quoted before. I just found it fascinating that we have now the Kaf HaChaim we said before also was Mekel, Sephardi, the Chacham Ovadia was Mekel. We have numerous Hasidic sources are Mekel, and we have the Aruch HaShulchan and other Gedolei HaChonim of Ashkenaz that were also Mekel, all to fulfill this minig of Klal Yisrael, which seemingly is only around 500 plus years old, to feed the birds on Shabbos Shirah. I wanted to end off with one more reason. Let's just try to end on time. Which this is a very fascinating reason. I saw this brought down in a luach. It's called the Luach Dover Be'ita. It comes out every year. It's a fascinating luach. I think our user has a copy of it. It's about 1,000 or so pages, and he goes through various minhagim of every day of the year and different reasons for it. And I started in the beginning of the shir. This shir was dedicated to Nishmas, my maternal grandfather. I know he very much liked this luach. He used to use it all the time. And this is a reason I saw it brought down in that luach. I think the person who puts together luach, Rabbi Genuth, he had put this reason together himself as follows. Another reason entirely for why we feed the birds on Shabbos Shirah. Another pasuk in this week's parsha b'Shalach, is Ani Hashem Roifecha. I am Hashem who heals you. There's a sefer called the Sefer Refuah V'Chaim, which is a Sephardi sefer written by Rav Chaim Falagi, who was one of the Gedolei Rabbanim in Turkey about 200 plus years ago, and he has a sefer on different skulas, different tricks, so to speak, for getting well quick. So he brings down that the word refuah is an acronym for the following 6 ideas. How do you get better? Reish stands for rachamim, that a person should beseech Hashem with anything that he can with and do rachmanis, and first beseech Hashem for rachmanis, but also practice rachmanis with other people, like Chazal tell us, call them rachamim al habriyos racham lav min hashmayim. Anyone has compassion to his fellow Jew, Hashem will have compassion on him. So refuah, the reish for refuah, says Rav Chaim Falagi, stands for rachamim, have compassion to your fellow Jew. Pei, he says, stands for pidyon, to give a certain amount of tzedakah. He has a cheshbon how to do it with the letters of your name and a certain amount of coins. So give a certain amount of money to tzedakah. That's also a skula to get well. Vav, he says, is to practice vatronis. Vatronis is a tremendous midah of just being able to give of your own resources, of whether it's money, time, talents, to help other people do what they need to accomplish, and that's also be tremendous sulo. So Reish was rachamim, Fei was pidyon, Vav is vatronis. Aleph, he says, of refuah is Aleph of refuah is ahava, to increase the love between fellow Jew, get rid of any hatred or any feelings of resentment towards any other person. And Hey, he says, is hatara, to be matir any neder, any vow a person took upon himself, that could be as a kitrig, that could be as a claim against him in Shemaim if he's not fulfilling it properly. So he says the word refuah stands for these 6 concepts. If a person would practice these 6 concepts, he says you should be zeicha to a refuah shleima. Now, says Rav Chaim Palagi in a different sefer, same author, different sefer, number 18, Sefer Ruach Chaim, which is a sefer on Shulchan Aruch. Where do we see a key example of vatronis, of someone being able to give without any ulterior motive, just be giver for the sake of giving? There's a halacha by kaparas. Many of us are familiar by kaparas, which we do between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. We take a chicken, we slug it around our heads, and there's various customs how to do it. But the point is that the chicken goes to tzedakah afterwards. The Ramah brings down a custom that after they shech the chicken, they take the innards of the chicken, the intestines and other things which are not typically eaten, and you put it in a public area, like on a rooftop or somewhere where the birds can come and eat it. Says Rav Chaim Falagi, why do we do that? He quotes from the Taz, which is over here in this number 18. He says the reason is because it brings out in us a rachamim, a rachamanas ala briyos. Zehat Tam, he says that's the reason Amasha Zarkin Begag, while we throw on the roof, Malkim Shamaytzian Sham, that's the place where birds are, Kedei Larachem ala briyos, in order to arouse in us the idea of having rachamim. So Rav Chaim Falagi continues and says this custom is v'chein nagu b'mishu chole. Anytime you have someone who's sick, umevakesh rachamim, and he needs rachmanas of Hashem, shamashlichem meichel oifetz. It's always a skula to throw food to birds, begagim, in rooftops or in public areas, kedei l'rachamim, in order to arouse compassion on our fellow mankind. Ubezeh yeh zoiche shirach olav min hashamayim. So says this Sefer Luach Dover B'Itoi. Basically, these two Rav Chaim Falagis together, we see this parsha specifically, Parshas B'Shalach, which is the parsha of Refuah Ani Hashem Roifecha. We want to practice our rachamim, we want to practice our vatronos on inculcating in ourselves these ideas, these midos of giving to others and simply giving to birds, as Rav Chaim Falagi brings down, is a skula to have a Refuah Shleima. So specifically on this Shabbos, it became the custom, he suggests, although Rav Chaim Falagi is not discussing Shabbos Shirah per se, but perhaps this is why specifically during this Shabbos, we specifically want to give to the birds, that we should be zeicha if anybody needs a Refuah, he should be zeicha to have a refuah shleima in this way of giving of himself and giving of his resources to the birds, and he should give to everybody. And thank you very much for coming.
Very nice.
Yeah, I'm taking questions.
Say anything at all?